What began as a simple act of kindness, giving away an old jacket, unraveled into a secret that could destroy everything. One folded note was all it took to turn trust into fear. Midnight hums through the glass towers, and Adrian Vale walks the silent floor with a slow, measured pace. 32, self-made, the kind of man who turns moving parts into quiet lines, his mind still mapping schedules and margins, while the world outside folds into silver reflections. The demo ended hours ago. Applause faded, glasses rinsed. Yet the room carries a thin echo of promise that refuses to sleep. He passes the conference wall, where a map of routes glows faint. Red pins like small beating hearts, green lines crossing states. Blue notes stacked like calm waves. He rubs the back of his neck, feeling the grit of a day that ran long. Thinking about arrival windows, driver brakes, fuel spikes, and a client who asked for miracles with a pleasant smile. The carpet softens his steps, the vents whisper, the city hums far below. He keeps walking, because motion keeps his thoughts from nodding. He checks doors, monitors, the prototype scanner locked where it should be, the new routing model saved to the correct vault. He breathes, counts, breathes again, choosing calm like a practice. On a table near the glass, the demo unit rests like a sleeping animal. Smooth shell, quiet lights, promise written in silence. He touches it with 2 fingers, thanking it for behaving in front of cameras. The memory of the pitch slides in. Clean numbers, clear edges, a room of faces leaning forward. A moment ere he felt the old lift of building something useful. Then the drop after, the emails with soft urgencies, the hints about competitors, the tug toward compromise he has learned to resist. He thinks of his father's shop, the day the shelves went bare, the silence after the auction. The hallway holds those thoughts without judgment. He lets them pass. He has work now, and work is a promise to do better than yesterday. He moves to the window, places his palm against the cold pane. The river carries a black ribbon of light. A ferry cuts a thin line. His phone buzzes. A calendar reminder that does not matter. He swipes it away. A photo peeks through for a second. His mother in a yard of boxes, smiling anyway. He sits, opens a notebook, writes 4 lines. Rest, review, refine, deliver. The words look small, but they hold. He lists the drivers who need new routes, the client who needs a call at 9, the supplier who worries about delays at the bridge, the junior analyst who has ideas worth hearing. Adrian stands, stretches his back until it pops, tells the room goodnight out loud. He presses the badge at the exit, hears the soft click, feels the cold draft from the stairwell, and starts down. His thoughts keep moving, not in worry, but in steady care. Each step a promise to the work he chose, the people he pays, and the future he will not let go. And the night holds its breath for him. Adrian noticed the man before the man noticed him. A figure bent over a mop bucket, sleeves rolled high, thin arms working with slow rhythm. The kind of work that swallows time without leaving a trace. Tomas Reyes was older, his face lined, his eyes focused on the floor tiles, as if every streak mattered. The bucket sloshed with chemical water that bit at the air, his hands raw from constant use. When the air conditioning roared on with a sudden gust, he shivered, pulling his shoulders inward. And Adrian, without thinking, unzipped his old field jacket, the one he had carried since his early days on loading docks, and pressed it into Tomas's hands. No pause, no comment, just the movement of one man covering another. Tomas blinked, surprised, his mouth opening as if to protest, but the warmth of the fabric was already seeping into him. He looked at Adrian as if searching for the catch, some hidden cost, but Adrian only nodded and kept walking. His stride steady, his mind already on routes and reports. The exchange meant nothing more to him than scratching an itch, an impulse to remove discomfort where he saw it. But Tomas stood still, the jacket heavy on his shoulders, his fingers brushing against the lining, and something in the pocket caught, a fold of paper, small, stiff, tucked deep. He hesitated, eyes flicking down the hall to where Adrian's footsteps faded. Then slowly he pulled the slip free. The paper creased and faintly yellowed. Ink scrawled in a hurried hand. He read it once, then again, his lips moving silently over the words, and his chest tightened as though the hallway had shrunk around him. He folded it back quickly, slipped it inside the pocket again, and gripped the jacket close, as if afraid the message might escape. For a moment he thought about chasing Adrian, handing it back, saying he had left something behind, but he did not. He walked to the supply closet instead, leaning against the door, his thoughts spinning. Adrian, meanwhile, returned to his office, unaware, his mind on spreadsheets and servers, replaying numbers. But the picture of Tomas stayed with him. The stooped figure, the tremor in his hands, the quiet dignity of a man most people never saw. He thought about how many nights men like that had kept his world clean, while he chased contracts and shook hands. He wondered how often he had passed them without truly noticing. Tonight had been different, not for any reason he could name, only because the cold in the hallway had cut deeper than usual, and he had answered it the simplest way he could, with a jacket he no longer needed. He did not know yet that the act had set something in motion, that the note Tomas had discovered was not a scrap or an accident but a key, left behind, waiting for eyes that would not dismiss it, eyes that had learned to notice small things, like streaks on a floor or paper caught in a seam. Tomas sat in the closet for a long time, jacket warm, heart uneasy, knowing already that what he had found was not meant for him. And yet it was in his hands all the same, a secret, folded in fabric. And somewhere down the hall Adrian kept working, unaware that his world had already begun to tremble. Tomas slipped his fingers deeper into the pocket for warmth, his skin aching from the sting of chemical water, and instead of the soft lining he felt the edge of paper, thin and dry, brittle with time. He froze, pulling it out slowly, as if afraid it might tear. The hallway was quiet, except for the low hum of the vents, and in that silence, the folded note seemed louder than any sound. He turned it in his hands, the creases sharp, the ink bleeding just slightly at the edges. Handwriting he didn't recognize but hurried, pressed hard into the page, as if written by someone desperate to be heard. He opened it carefully, flattening it against his palm, and read the 4 lines that changed the air around him. The words simple, almost blunt, yet carrying a weight that made his chest tighten. It was as if someone had leaned close and whispered in his ear, calling his true name, naming a truth he had not expected. He read the words again, his lips moving silently, trying to make sense of them. They spoke of something hidden, a warning wrapped inside plain instruction, a message left behind by hands he did not know. The first time through he felt confusion, the second time unease, the third time a sharp jolt of recognition, as though a puzzle he had never seen before was suddenly missing only one piece. He folded the note again quickly, his heartbeat uneven, his eyes lifting to the long empty stretch of hallway, expecting someone to step out of the shadows and ask for it back. But no one came. Only the low echo of his own breathing filled the space. He slipped the paper back into the pocket, then pulled it out again, unable to let it go, his fingers trembling slightly as he read it one more time, wondering who had written it, wondering if Adrian knew it was there, wondering if this jacket was never meant to leave his closet. The note said things Tomas could not easily ignore, words about shipments, about doors left open, about red vans at impossible hours, and even though he was just a janitor who scrubbed floors and emptied bins, he had seen enough to know that this was not the idle scribble of a bored hand. It was information, the kind of information men carried quietly when they feared being watched. He thought back to nights when he had seen trucks idle too long at the dock, drivers who kept their eyes down, pallets that looked too neat, too carefully wrapped, things he had brushed off as not his concern. Now those small moments pressed against the words on the page and made his stomach twist. For a long minute he stood still in the empty hallway, the jacket warm, the paper hot in his hand. Though it was only paper, he thought about Adrian, about the man who had given it to him without ceremony, about the tired look in his eyes, about the way his steps carried both pride and weight. Tomas knew he should probably return the note, hand it back, tell him what he found, but something in him hesitated, not from dishonesty but from fear, because once he handed it over, once he spoke it aloud, nothing would remain the same. Secrets, once revealed, do not go back into pockets. They shift the ground under your feet. He closed his fist around the note, and for the first time in many years, Tomas felt as if the life of someone far above him in the glass towers might depend on what he chose to do next. Tomas walked slowly down the quiet hall, the jacket heavy on his shoulders, the note burning against his palm like a coal he could not hold for long. He had folded it back carefully, but the words still pressed against his mind. Sharp and insistent, he turned the corner and saw Adrian standing by the elevator. Tall, tired, one hand braced against the steel wall as he waited for the doors to open, the light above him blinking steadily. Tomas hesitated, unsure if he should disturb him, unsure if what he carried would be welcomed or dismissed, but the weight of silence became too much. He stepped forward and cleared his throat softly. Adrian looked up, surprised, eyes narrowing slightly at the sight of the janitor holding something small in his hand. Tomas held it out with a quiet respect, saying only that he thought the jacket was empty when he put it on, that he had found this tucked inside, that it did not belong to him. Adrian reached out, puzzled, and unfolded the slip of paper, his brow furrowing as his eyes moved quickly over the 4 lines. Once, then again, and then one more time, slower, the silence around them thickening. The words were simple, but carried the weight of dynamite. They're using your shipments. The back door is in the routing table. Watch the red vans at 3 a.m. Adrian felt his chest tighten, his heartbeat stumble, his throat dry. He read them aloud, without meaning to, his voice low and sharp, the sound of it echoing strangely in the empty hall. Tomas watched his face, watched the moment the calm mask cracked, the millionaire who seemed untouchable suddenly trembling in the way only truth can make a man tremble. Adrian pressed the paper flat against his palm, as if testing if it was real, his mind already racing through systems and codes, memories and warnings. He thought of the routes he had signed off, the late-night deliveries, the subtle anomalies his software sometimes flagged but never confirmed. The note pointed directly to something he had always feared, a weakness in his empire that no amount of money or polish could erase, a hidden hand in the very system that had made him rich. He turned to Tomas, his eyes sharper now, asking where he had found it, his voice urgent. Tomas explained quietly that it was in the pocket of the jacket, that he had not meant to pry, that he thought it might be nothing but felt he should give it back. Adrian nodded, but his mind was elsewhere, rolling through names and faces who had access, who knew the routing tables in that much detail, who could be slipping red vans into a schedule built with his own signature. He thought of his COO, his engineers, the security firm he hired, the competitors who smiled at conferences while sharpening knives behind their backs. The note was not vague, it was precise. Only someone with knowledge of his systems could have written it, and the mention of 3 a.m. sent a cold jolt through him, because tonight, his logs showed an unscheduled shipment queued at that exact hour. The elevator chimed and the doors opened, but neither man moved. The paper hung between them like a living thing. Adrian folded it once more and slipped it into his own pocket, his hand shaking slightly. He thanked Tomas, in a voice quieter than usual, not the polished tone he used with clients, but a raw sound. He said the words mattered, that they might have just saved something he could not afford to lose. Tomas nodded, unsure what to say, feeling both lighter and heavier at once. And as the doors closed behind Adrian, the janitor stood alone in the cold hallway, realizing he had stepped into a story far larger than he had ever expected. And the man upstairs who lived in glass towers now carried a piece of paper that could change everything. Adrian stood with the folded paper in his hand and felt the ground tilt, Not the marble floor beneath him, but something deeper. The kind of tilt that starts in the ribs and rises into the throat. The old fear he had carried since boyhood, the ruin of his father's freight company pressing back into memory with the sharpness of yesterday. He remembered the night the yard went silent, trucks parked in crooked rows, men with caps in their hands watching his father sign the last set of papers. Everything lost because of something hidden in routes and shipments that no one had seen until it was too late. Adrian had built his empire on the promise that he would never repeat that collapse, never let shadows live inside his logistics. But now, staring at the note in his palm, he felt that same shadow reaching again. Only 3 people knew about the red vans. Only 3. He counted them like a man counting breaths underwater. Himself, his lead systems architect, and Brett Nolan, his chief operating officer, the friend he had trusted since the first lean years, when the company was run out of a warehouse that smelled of oil and dust. Brett had been there for every late night, every gamble that could have broken them, every victory that had lifted them. And yet the note pointed a finger toward betrayal, so sharp Adrian could barely breathe, his throat tightening as the words replayed. "They're using your shipments. The back door is in the routing table. Watch the red vans at 3 a.m. He leaned against the cold wall beside the elevator, paper trembling in his hand, though his body looked still. To anyone watching, he was only a man waiting for the lift, composed in his tailored suit, but inside his chest, the tremor moved through him, quick and merciless. The kind of tremor no one else could see. His mind began to strip through data, remembering logs that flagged anomalies, shipments marked as overflow, routed through secondary docks, pallets that never appeared in billing but showed up in scans. He had brushed them off as software noise, a bug in the system, because he had wanted to believe in control, in clean lines, in trust. Trust, he thought bitterly. It was always the most dangerous variable. Not fuel prices or border delays or weather storms, but the trust you placed in people who smiled and said they were with you. The same trust his father had placed in a partner who had siphoned routes to competitors. The same trust that had left his family standing in an empty office as men carried out desks and files. Adrian pushed the memory away, but it lingered, the taste of loss metallic at the back of his tongue. He told himself he was not that boy anymore. He was not powerless. He had built walls of data, layers of security, an empire of precision. Yet someone had found a way in, someone close, someone he had let into the core. He closed his fist around the note until the paper bent, his jaw tight, his breath shallow, and he made a silent vow that this time he would not look away. This time he would follow the shadow all the way to its source, even if that meant tearing open the heart of his own company, even if that meant facing Brett with questions that might shatter years of loyalty. Adrian straightened his shoulders as the elevator doors opened again, the tremor still in him, unseen, unspoken, but now reshaped into a cold resolve. He would not be blindsided. Not again. Not ever. Adrian stepped into his office with the note still heavy in his pocket, and the silence pressing down like a hand on his shoulders. The lights were low, screens asleep, machines humming their quiet chorus. He closed the door behind him and let his eyes adjust to the dimness. Moving slowly as if each step needed to be weighed, the air smelled faintly of stale coffee, and the sharp tang of electronics left running too long. The familiar scent of his second home. He walked past his desk, past the long shelves lined with awards and binders, past the framed photographs that he rarely looked at anymore, his gaze restless, searching for something he could not yet name. It was the glint that stopped him, the smallest flicker of reflection where no reflection should have been, inside the slats of event cover high on the wall. At first he thought it was nothing, a trick of glass and light, but when he stepped closer, the glint sharpened into something unmistakable, the round black eye of a lens, so small it could have been overlooked forever, if not for the way it caught the faintest slice of glow. He froze, his chest tightening, his breath shallow. Because he had never installed such a thing, he had cameras, yes. But not there. Not hidden like a secret. This was something else. A quiet eye set to watch him in moments he thought were his own. He stared at it for a long time. The tremor from earlier rising again, old fear mixing with fresh anger. He thought of the words on the note, of shipments twisted and routes betrayed. And now here was proof that the betrayal was not only in the yard or the data, but in his own sanctuary, the place he worked, the place he thought safe. Someone had pierced his walls and set eyes on him without his knowing, stealing not money but privacy, stealing him in inches, moment by moment, every phone call, every sigh, every pause, all of it recorded by a lens that was not his. Adrian pulled a chair quietly across the carpet and climbed up, his fingers steady, though his heart raced. He removed the vent cover with slow, deliberate care, the screws reluctant, the metal groaning faintly. And when he set it down, the camera was clear, no larger than a coin, wires tucked neatly, a transmitter faintly blinking. He held it in his palm and felt both fury and clarity, because this was no accident, no leftover test. This was deliberate. Someone had been watching, someone close enough to slip into his office, confident enough to believe he would never notice. He thought of Brett, he thought of his engineers, he thought of Sabrina, who had walked these halls with practiced ease, and he felt the old wound of his father's collapse open wider. He placed the vent cover back, leaving the office as it had been, the camera resting now inside his desk drawer like a poisonous secret. His eyes swept the room again, seeing not comfort but danger, every frame, every shelf, every blinking light suspect. He sat down in the darkness, the note and the camera both waiting in front of him, and understood that his empire was no longer only threatened from outside. The enemy was already inside, watching, waiting, and he would need to decide how to answer before the red vans rolled at 3 a.m. Tomas waited by the corner of the office as Adrian sat in the dim light, the paper folded on the desk and the tiny camera locked away in a drawer. He stood quiet for a moment, watching the younger man's shoulders tense, the kind of tension that meant the world was shifting beneath his feet. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, careful, steady, the voice of a man who had learned to walk gently around the pride of others. He said he had noticed things, small things, not the kind people put in reports, but the kind that stick in memory because they feel out of place. Adrian looked up, eyes sharp, and Tomas continued, saying pallets had been left where no pallets should be, not in busy corners but in quiet ones, tucked near back walls where cameras barely reached, and always wrapped so neat it looked like someone wanted them invisible, not simply stored. Adrian frowned and leaned forward, listening as Tomas told him more. Drivers who avoided cameras on purpose, men who parked at angles that kept their plates just out of sight, men who walked quickly through shadows instead of along the lit path. It was not proof, but it was pattern, and Tomas had spent years seeing patterns others ignored. Mops and buckets gave him time to notice, hours of silence that made the smallest habits glow brighter. He said cleaning schedules had been shifted without requests, doors unlocked when they should have been bolted, deliveries that arrived minutes before the official log said they were due, all of it small enough to look like mistakes if you did not watch closely. But together they painted something else, something planned, something steady. Adrian rubbed his temples, the tremor in his chest stronger now. He asked Tomas why he had never spoken of this before, why he had kept it to himself, and Tomas gave a sad smile, saying janitors are not the kind of men people listen to, that when you clean floors for a living, you learn to keep your eyes open and your mouth shut, because the moment you speak, people see you as trouble instead of help. So he kept it inside, noting each piece the way he noted, which tiles cracked first after storms, math done quietly with a mop in his hands, math no one else wanted to see. Adrian felt a pang then, shame mixing with respect, because he realized this man had been protecting his company in silence longer than he knew, without pay or title, only by caring enough to notice. The office grew heavier with every word. each detail landing like a stone, building a weight Adrian could not ignore. The pallets, the drivers, the cameras, the schedules, all fitting against the warning on the note, all pointing toward betrayal within his own walls. He leaned back, exhaling slow, and for the first time in many months he felt less alone, because across from him stood a man others dismissed, a man with worn hands and a bent back, but also with eyes that missed nothing. Adrian thanked him, not with the easy words of a boss to an employee, but with the quiet sincerity of one man to another, knowing now that Tomas Reyes might be the only person in the building who had truly been watching out for him all along. Adrian moved through the hallway with the weight of Tomas's words in his chest, the note in his pocket, and the small camera still locked in his desk drawer. The building was silent, midnight pressing heavy against the glass walls, and his steps turned toward a place he had not opened in years. A storage room at the far end of the floor, where dust had settled over forgotten files, where his father's ledgers had been left in boxes when the company folded. He had kept them not for use but for memory, a reminder of what collapse looked like, a caution written in ink and numbers, the smell of cardboard and paper thick as he pushed the door open, the light flickering to life with a slow hum, showing rows of stacked boxes sagging with age. He pulled one from the bottom, dust rising in a soft cloud that made him cough. The box was heavier than he remembered, corners softened by time. Inside lay the leather-bound ledgers his father had carried everywhere, pages filled by hand, neat columns of names, dates, weights, cross, docs, the rhythm of a man who trusted pen and eye more than any machine. Adrian set one on a table and opened it carefully. The pages yellowed but firm, the ink faded but still clear, and as he turned them he felt the strange pull of memory. Evenings, when he sat as a boy beside his father's desk, listening to the scratch of pen while trucks rumbled outside, nights when hope still lived in every number. Halfway through the book his eye caught something that made him still. A symbol scrawled in the margin, not part of the ledger's neat system, an arrow bent like a fishhook, sharp at the tip, curved back on itself. It looked small, careless at first glance, but he knew it immediately. It was the same mark drawn at the bottom of the note Tomas had handed him, the same odd shape that had stared back from the paper with warning. Adrian traced it with his fingertip, the air colder now, because this was no coincidence. The symbol was not new, it had lived in these pages for years, beside roots that had once bankrupted his father. He flipped further, his pulse quickening, finding the same arrow again and again, always beside shipments that later turned out wrong, deliveries that never reached clients, losses that hollowed the company's books until there was nothing left to hold. He remembered the nights of shouting, the calls unanswered, the morning his father came home pale and broken, saying the business was gone, saying he had trusted the wrong man. Adrian had never forgotten, and now, here was proof that the same shadow that ruined his father's work had found its way into his own, the same symbol, the same quiet theft, echoing across time. He closed the ledger slowly, hands trembling, and sat with the box open in front of him, dust floating in the flicker of the light, the past and present folding into each other. He understood now that what he faced was not just betrayal in his company, but the continuation of something older, a pattern that had stalked his family for decades, the arrow like a fishhook, pulling them down again and again. He whispered into the empty room that he would not let it happen twice. He would break the line this time, even if it meant tearing apart everything he thought he knew. He pressed the ledger shut, slid it back into the box, and carried the weight of his father's failure with him as fuel, a promise that he would not fall the same way, not while he still had breath to fight. Adrian sat in the dark of the loading bay, the air heavy with the smell of oil and concrete, his back pressed against the cold wall, his phone vibrating softly in his hand, the message arriving at 2:58 a.m. sharp. Brett Nolan's name, lighting up the screen with the kind of cheer that felt practiced. The words written in that easy, polished rhythm Brett used when he wanted to sell comfort, early hustle, Already moving. Clients will love it. The tone wrapped in the bright varnish of public relations, as if he were writing for shareholders, instead of to a friend who had built the company with him. The kind of message meant to hide something, not reveal it. Adrian stared at the glow of the screen and felt his jaw tighten, because he knew exactly what was about to happen. He stayed low, the shadow of crates hiding him. The bay door cracked enough for him to see the stretch of asphalt outside, the night air damp, the hum of engines faint at first and then louder, headlights cutting across the lot like blades. 3 red vans pulling in at 3 a.m. on the dot. Not late, not careless, but 3 minutes ahead of the logged schedule, as if the drivers knew the rhythm better than the system itself. Adrian's chest tightened as the memory of the note replayed. Watch the red vans at 3 a.m. The handwriting he did not recognize, but which had already proven sharper than any software alarm. The vans slowed and rolled into position with a smoothness that spoke of habit, of practice, like dancers stepping onto a stage they had rehearsed 100 times before. He watched the men climb out, their movements quick, their eyes never lingering on the cameras, always angled away, shoulders hunched but not nervous, confident in the kind of way that came from knowing they had cover. One man raised a hand to another, and the gesture was casual, too casual, the ease of someone who believed he belonged here, and Adrian felt the heat of betrayal rise in his chest, because only someone inside could make them feel that safe. Only someone close could smooth the way. And the text from Brett was still glowing on his phone, sweet words hiding poison. Adrian stayed still, every muscle tense, watching as pallets were moved with efficient silence. One marked with the neat corners Tomas had described, too neat, wrapped tighter than standard practice, the kind of perfection that wanted to go unseen. He leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing, and saw the label was wrong, a route code that didn't exist in his system, but logged anyway by the back door in the routing table. The very one the note had warned him about. The drivers loaded with calm precision, stacking what wasn't theirs onto vans that would disappear into streets where cameras conveniently lost their vision. Adrian felt the same tremor in his chest that had haunted him since his father's collapse. But this time it hardened into steel, a vow forming with every second that ticked by. The phone buzzed again, another line from Brett. A joke about burning the midnight oil. The kind of smile you could hear even without seeing it. The smile that had arrived too soon. A mask sent before the job was finished, and Adrian's hand closed into a fist around the device. The choice clear now. There would be no ignoring, no brushing away. Tonight he had seen with his own eyes the truth his father had missed, until it was too late. The red vans were real. The betrayal was inside. And when dawn came, Brett Nolan would no longer be the friend he once was. He would be the man Adrian had to face head-on, no matter the cost. The scanner in Adrian's hand gave a soft, steady ping. Green lights across the screen. Every code clean, every entry in order, the kind of reassurance he had built his empire upon. Yet standing in the half-lit bay, the cold concrete pressing through his shoes, he felt no relief. Because Tomas was beside him, pointing with a quiet certainty to a pallet near the back wall, wrapped so neatly it looked almost staged, plastic stretched tight and smooth at the edges, corners sharp like a gift wrapped by someone with too much practice. Tomas spoke softly, saying pallets never looked that perfect unless someone wanted them to, unless the goal was not to ship goods but to hide them. And Adrian knew he was right. Because in logistics, imperfection was normal. Rough tape, dented corners, marks of real hands moving real weight. This was something else. He stepped forward, the scanner still humming in his palm, its screen insisting there was nothing wrong. And for a moment he almost wished it were true, almost wished that Tomas was mistaken, and that the tremor in his chest was only paranoia. But he had seen too much already. He could not ignore what stood in front of him. He crouched, ran his hand across the slick surface of the plastic, then slid a knife through the corner. the sound of tearing plastic sharp in the quiet bay. He peeled it back layer by layer until the boxes beneath were visible. Plain brown cartons, stamped with codes that matched the manifest, at least on the surface. He slit one open, pulled out a sealed packet, and froze. Inside were microchips, small squares of metal and silicon packed in foam trays, each one marked with serial numbers that looked official at first glance. But the weight was wrong, the etching too shallow, the surface just slightly off. He had handled enough components to feel it in his fingers. These were counterfeit, fakes designed to mimic medical-grade chips that hospitals and labs depended on, the kind of fraud that could cost lives as well as fortunes. Adrian felt his stomach twist, his throat dry, because every barcode, every scan, every line of data said these were legitimate shipments traced through his system, and yet none of them were billed to his clients. None of them existed on paper beyond the false trail in his routing table. He looked up at Tomas, who met his gaze with the calm sorrow of a man who had seen too many tricks in quiet corners. Tomas said softly that lies always left signs if you bothered to notice them. That plastic wrapped too neatly was as telling as ink smudged on a page. Adrian nodded slowly, the weight of what he was holding sinking deeper. These counterfeit chips would not only ruin contracts if discovered, they would ruin trust, the one thing he had spent his life building. Worse still, the note in his pocket, the camera in his drawer, Brett's message on his phone, all of it now tied together with this pallet, this shipment that was never supposed to exist, a ghost hidden in plain sight, wearing his name. He set the packet down carefully, as if afraid the lie might spill across the floor, and stood in the bay with Tomas at his side, understanding fully that his company, his reputation, his very life's work was already being used as a weapon. He whispered to himself that this would not be buried, not like his father's ledgers, not like the losses that had destroyed his family. This time, he would pull every false layer back until the truth stood naked. No matter how dangerous it became, the scanner beeped again in his hand, green light still flashing, as if mocking him, as if reminding him that systems could be fooled, but men who chose to see could not. Adrian sat in his office with the blinds drawn and the ledger from his father still open on the table beside him, the note folded in his pocket, the counterfeit chips locked in a steel case by his desk, and the silence around him so thick it pressed against his ears. He pulled up the contracts on his screen, every clause, every addendum, every revision logged with timestamps. He read them one by one until the words blurred, clauses stacked like bricks, language meant to be precise yet written in tones that softened sharp edges. And then, buried inside the updates from 6 months ago, he saw it. A service waiver marked harmless. A small adjustment to routing overflow diagnostics through a third-party node. The language sounded technical but not threatening. An engineer's afterthought. A line you would skim past with a nod. But his chest tightened as he read it again, because he understood exactly what it meant. He had signed it himself, in a rush, thinking only of efficiency, thinking of how to reassure clients who worried about delays. The clause had looked like a gesture of flexibility, a way to handle volume without stress. But now he saw the hook hidden in the smooth language, the door he had unlocked with his own signature, a door that let someone else walk straight into his house, not through force, not through code breaking, but through the polite permission of paperwork, Brett's paperwork, his trusted COO, the man who had smiled as he slid the update across the desk, saying it would smooth operations, saying auditors liked redundancies. Adrian closed his eyes and felt a wave of sickness, remembering how quickly he had signed, how easily the red vans, the counterfeit chips, the camera in the vent, all of it flowed back to this single line, a gateway dressed as efficiency, a quiet betrayal dressed as professionalism. And he realized that while he had built walls of code and firewalls of steel, the breach had come through words, through trust, through the same ink that had once ruined his father, The fishhook arrow had not been drawn in margins this time. It had been written into a contract, a clause no one would question, because the man who presented it was supposed to be loyal. Adrian pressed his palms against his face, the weight of it crushing, the shame of knowing he had opened the door himself unbearable. He read the clause again, slower now, tracing each word with the tip of his finger. Overflow diagnostics, third-party node, phrases meant to sound boring, meant to slip past tired eyes. And he wondered how many nights Brett had spent crafting it, how many drafts it took to shape a perfect lie, the kind of lie that holds because it looks too dull to be dangerous. Adrian leaned back, staring at the ceiling, and thought about how betrayal never arrived, shouting. It arrived, smiling, asking for a small signature, arriving in the form of efficiency and trust. He whispered aloud that this would not stand. Not again. He would tear open every line, every clause, every shadow in his system, until the man who wrote it had nowhere left to hide. The contract glowed on the screen, its language polished and polite, and Adrian saw it for what it was, not harmless at all, but the weapon that had let thieves step into his home. He closed the file, his resolve hardening, and told himself that this time he would not be the man fooled by smooth words. This time he would fight back, line by line, until the hook was ripped free. Adrian sat at the long table in the dim warehouse office, papers spread like fallen leaves, contracts glowing on the laptop screen, the note from the jacket folded in his pocket, his head heavy with the weight of discovery. Tomas stood across from him, the mop handle still leaning by the door, his jacket zipped high, his hands rough and red but steady. He spoke with the calm of someone who had spent a lifetime noticing what others overlooked. His words slow, measured, never wasting more than needed. He said there was a way to turn the trap around without shouting, without tipping their hand, something simple enough to look invisible, yet sharp enough to cut through lies. Adrian listened, his eyes narrowing, as Tomas laid it out. You swap one barcode across a decoy pallet, let the thieves believe the move worked as it always had, let them load what they think is theirs. Only this time, the code links not to empty shadows, but to a mirror, a packet that copies every transmission they send, a twin signal tied back into the network, so that every client in the chain sees exactly who touched the goods, where the goods traveled, which hands moved them. Tomas explained it, without technical flourish, describing it in the math of cleaning, how one spill spread if you didn't trace it back to the first drop, how one lie multiplied unless you caught its mirror image. Adrian felt his pulse rise, because it was elegant, the kind of solution he had overlooked in his spiral of paranoia. And it came not from his engineers or his COO, but from a man who cleaned floors with eyes always open. He asked Tomas how he thought of it, and Tomas shrugged, saying, patterns repeat. A mop and a barcode both tell you the same thing. If you watch long enough, people leave trails, and trails can be marked. Adrian smiled faintly for the first time in days, the weight in his chest easing just enough to let in a breath. He opened his laptop and began writing code, his fingers fast, the logic flowing as Tomas's words guided him, an intercept built into the false label, a ghost code stitched with mirrors, not breaking the thieves but letting them break themselves. Adrian showed him the stream as it built, packets split, traced, replayed across every linked system, so no one could deny what was sent. No one could erase who had touched it. They tested it on a dummy run, a decoy pallet wrapped in perfect corners to mimic the counterfeit one. The scanner pinged clean as always, but when Adrian pulled up the logs, the mirror flared, every step captured, every hand revealed. Tomas leaned closer, nodding once, no smile, just quiet approval. Adrian felt the tremor in his ribs shift into something stronger, resolve replacing fear. He realized that he was not alone, that the janitor with the tired eyes had given him not just a plan, but a chance to take back control. Together, they had turned deception into a trap, and as dawn bled into the warehouse windows, Adrian closed the laptop and whispered that tonight would be the night the hunters discovered they were prey. Tomas only nodded again, his silence as steady as his plan. And the trash bag by the door rustled faintly, carrying away the old lies, making space for the new game to begin. At 3 in the morning, the building seemed to hold its breath, the wide docks silent except for the low rumble of engines warming, and then the red vans pulled out, with the confidence of men who had done this many times before, their headlights sweeping across the lot, their tires whispering against the asphalt. The drivers leaning easy in their seats with the smiles of men certain they had a friend on the inside. They moved with no fear of alarms, no fear of cameras, no hesitation, as if the entire system had been built to serve them, and in a way it had, until tonight. Adrian sat 3 floors above in the dim glow of the server room, the hum of machines surrounding him like a pulse, the air cool and dry, the kind of space where secrets were meant to stay hidden. Beside him, Tomas sat with his hands folded, eyes steady on the screen, even if the code scrolling there was foreign. And on Adrian's other side was Lena Ortiz, the one engineer he trusted completely, her dark hair tied back, her fingers hovering near the keyboard, ready to steady the system if it shuddered under the strain. The 3 of them formed a small triangle of light in the wide gray room, watching the plan unfold in silence. The map on the screen lit up as the first mirrored packet returned, a single dot blinking in rhythm, then another, and soon a breadcrumb trail stretched outward, each point marking where the pallets passed, where the signal bounced, where the thieves thought they were invisible. But instead every move was being painted across the network, a constellation blooming line by line, like stars stitching themselves into a sky no one could deny. Adrian leaned forward, his breath shallow, watching the pattern take shape, the false barcode humming quietly in the background, the decoy pallet already in motion, every step tracked, every lie captured. The drivers carried themselves like victors, the vans moving smooth through checkpoints, slipping past cameras, as if they knew exactly where to turn their faces. But each time they thought they had disappeared, the system recorded them again, their paths burned into the map with quiet accuracy. Tomas leaned closer, his rough hand pointing to the cluster of dots circling a warehouse 2 miles away, his voice low but firm, saying that was where they always paused. He had seen it before while sweeping the backlot, men smoking near the fence, vans idling as if waiting for permission. Adrian nodded, because now he could see it too, proof glowing in front of them, the destination undeniable. Lena murmured that the mirror was holding, no sign they suspected, the packets moving as if nothing was different, and Adrian felt a slow fire build in his chest, the tremor of fear replaced by the steady heat of resolve. Tonight the hunters had stepped into his house, thinking it was theirs. Tonight they carried evidence instead of theft. Every client in the chain receiving the mirrored logs, every transaction marked with fingerprints that could not be erased. Adrian sat back finally, the weight of months settling into clarity. He turned to Tomas and saw the same calm in the janitor's eyes, the quiet satisfaction of a man who had noticed everything. And for the first time in a long time, Adrian smiled, small but real, because he knew the trap had sprung, and the stars on the screen would guide him straight to the truth. The trail of dots on the map burned brighter as the packets came home, each hop traced, each movement nailed down with the clarity of math that does not lie. Lena's fingers darted across the keyboard to resolve the addresses, her voice steady but edged with disbelief. She said the signal was bouncing through layers of protection, but not enough to hide the truth. One by one, the names of holders, lessors, and accounts lit up. Hollow fronts, meant to mislead. Empty shells stacked like paper screens, but behind them the pattern was obvious. Adrian leaned closer, his jaw set, as the final resolution appeared. An IP that linked to a shell Brett controlled, his COO, his friend of 10 years, the man who had toasted his first contract win with cheap whiskey in a rented office, the man who had once slept on a warehouse floor with him because they couldn't afford security. The name burned on the screen with the cruelty of truth, no longer possible to ignore. From the shell it bled to a warehouse, Nothing remarkable on the outside. Leased under the name of a marketing vendor Brett had pushed into small contracts last year. Adrian remembered the pitch. How Brett had described the vendor as a cheap solution, a friend's recommendation, a harmless side expense. He had nodded, distracted, signed the approval, never suspecting it was not a vendor but a mask. The lease pointed directly to the very place Tomas had seen vans idle at night, the dots on the map circling like wolves at a fence. Adrian felt the sickness of betrayal, but beneath it, something sharper, cleaner, anger, stripped of confusion, anger he could finally use. The last path resolved to an account, not in Brett's name but linked through careful trails, to a competitor Adrian knew too well. A company that shook his hand at charity galas, exchanged smiles over champagne, whispered about collaboration that never came. He had courted them, thinking them rivals but not enemies, and now he saw the lines drawn, Brett funneling stolen shipments through them, disguising theft as business, feeding the very firm that wanted his market share. Every gala smile now felt like a blade pressed against his back. Adrian sat still, his chest rising and falling slowly, and for the first time in weeks he felt no tremor, no choking weight, only a steady fire that burned without shaking. Tomas watched him carefully, waiting for the crack. But Adrian did not crack. He turned to Lena and told her to save every trace, every log, every mirrored packet. Redundancy on redundancy, no step left unmarked, because this time there would be no denial. Brett had sold him out, sold the company, sold the future they had built, and Adrian would not let him sell it a second longer. The betrayal was bitter, yes, but clarity was sweeter. The enemy was not a ghost in the system, not a faceless rival. It was a friend who had smiled too soon, written clauses too smooth, slid contracts across desks, with words polished to hide the hooks. Adrian rose from the chair, his back straight, the paper note in his pocket, and the constellation map glowing on the screen. His voice low but hard as stone, when he whispered that Brett Nolan had made the worst mistake of his life, because he had underestimated the man who had nothing left to lose but everything still to protect. Adrian sent the message just after dawn, a simple request to his COO, written in the same tone he had used 100 times before. Nothing sharp, nothing strange, only a calm suggestion to walk the floor together, to look over shipments, to see how things were running after a long night. Brett replied quickly, too quickly, his words dressed in casual confidence, calling it a good idea, promising coffee, adding a smile in text, the kind of ease that rang hollow now. Adrian read it twice, and slipped the phone back into his pocket, his palms open, his voice calm, his face ready to show nothing but professional courtesy. The warehouse was quiet, except for the murmur of forklifts starting their morning rounds, the sound of crates being shifted, the metallic scrape of wheels on concrete. Adrian walked with steady steps through the wide space, his eyes tracing the routes he knew by heart. Tomas was already in place by the side entrance, a cart in his hands, his posture easy but his gaze steady, the look of a man who had been ignored enough times in life that now he had no more patience for it, the look of someone done being talked over, the mop and bucket gone, replaced with the quiet authority of presence alone. Adrian nodded at him as he passed, a silent promise that what came next would not erase the part Tomas had played in seeing what others did not. Behind the loading dock door at the far end of the floor, federal agents waited in silence, compliance officers beside them, their breaths held in the shadow of crates, their eyes sharp, their files thick with the mirrored packets Lena had saved, proof stacked higher than the lies Brett had built, all of it ready to fall. The moment Adrian gave the signal, 2 doors stood at opposite ends of the same wide room, one guarded by Tomas with his cart, the other holding the law itself. Adrian stood in the middle, waiting for Brett. When Brett arrived, his smile was too bright, his hand extended in that easy charm that had won so many clients, his voice smooth as he said it was good to start the day together. He looked around with the pride of ownership, as if the building and the shipments still belonged to him, as if he had not already sold them to someone else. Adrian returned the smile with careful calm, his palms open, his tone low, and even as he invited Brett to walk, to look at pallets, to trace the roots, to see the strength of the system they had built, the system Brett had broken. They walked slowly, side by side, footsteps echoing across concrete, Brett talking easily about efficiency and growth, Adrian listening, his face still, his chest steady, the anger inside him sharpened into clean resolve. He let Brett walk into the center of the room, between the two doors, between the man with the cart and the law waiting in silence, and when Brett stopped to gesture at a stack of crates, Adrian finally spoke, his words calm but cutting, saying he knew about the shell accounts, the warehouse lease, the clause in the contract, the counterfeit chips, and the red vans that rolled at 3 a.m. Brett's smile faltered, his lips parting, his eyes flicking toward the doors without meaning to, the mask slipping just enough for the truth to show, and Adrian nodded once. The dock door opened, agents moving fast, voices sharp, compliance officers with files in hand, Tomas pushing his cart forward, steady and silent. Brett's world collapsed in the space between two doors. His escape cut off, his betrayal laid bare, and Adrian stood calm in the center, palms open, voice low, as he told his oldest friend that the future he had tried to sell was no longer his to touch. The sound of handcuffs closing echoed through the wide bay, sharp against the low hum of forklifts starting their morning rounds. Brett stood stiff, his suit wrinkled from a night he had clearly not slept, his eyes darting from Adrian to the agents to the door that would not open for him, his lips twisted into the faintest smirk, a mask he had worn for years, the smirk of a man who believed charm and words could bend the truth until it looked like favor. Adrian held the folded slip of paper in his hand, the one Tomas had pulled from the jacket pocket, the note that had started the unraveling, and for a long moment he only looked at it, feeling the weight of his father's ledgers, the counterfeit chips, the cameras hidden in vents, every betrayal compressed into 4 lines, written by a stranger who had dared to tell the truth. Adrian lifted the paper and read it aloud, his voice steady, each word clear. They're using your shipments. The back door is in the routing table. Watch the red vans at 3 a.m. The sound carried through the bay, simple and sharp, the kind of words that did not need polish, only courage to be spoken. Brett's smirk deepened, his voice smooth, as he said anyone could have written that scraps of paper did not hold up in boardrooms or courts, that Adrian was letting paranoia cloud his vision. The agents did not move, their faces unreadable, waiting. Then the loading dock door opened wider, and the sound of wheels cut across the concrete, pallets rolling forward one by one, shrink wrap glinting under the warehouse lights, the very shipments Brett had believed gone, hidden in the red vans that had slipped into the night. He blinked, his smirk faltering, his lips parting as if the light itself had betrayed him. The agents wheeled them into the open, cutting the plastic, revealing box after box of counterfeit medical chips. The foam trays stacked neatly, the serial numbers shallow, the fakes so obvious under scrutiny that even from a distance no one could deny it. Brett's color drained from his face, the smirk gone, leaving only the pale, slack expression of a man watching the mask he had lived in shatter. Adrian did not raise his voice. He only repeated the 4 lines once more, slower this time, his eyes fixed on Brett, each word landing like a hammer. They're using your shipments. The back door is in the routing table. Watch the red vans at 3 a.m. Silence followed, heavy and final. Brett tried to speak, but no words came. Only the dry click of a throat searching for excuses. The agents pulled the pallets closer. Evidence undeniable. Proof heavier than charm. And Tomas stood steady by the side door, his cart forgotten, his eyes locked on the man who had thought janitors saw nothing. The smirk drained completely then, like color fading from a photograph left too long in the sun. Brett looked smaller, shoulders slumped, his confidence dissolved into the air around him. Adrian folded the paper once more, slipping it back into his pocket, not with triumph, but with a quiet grief. Because this was not just the fall of a partner, it was the burial of trust itself. And yet, the note remained. 4 lines that had saved an empire from the same ruin that had destroyed his father. 4 lines that no smirk could erase. The warehouse was quieter now. The chaos drained away. Agents gone with their evidence. Brett escorted out with wrists bound. The pallets sealed in marked trucks. Lena back in her office, compiling the mirrored packets for court. Only Adrian and Tomas remained, sitting at the long table with the note between them. The air heavy but still. The hum of the building, settling like it had exhaled after a storm. Adrian leaned back, his shoulders stiff, the paper folded once more in his hand. His eyes fixed not on the present, but on the path that had led here. The betrayal uncovered, the future steadied, yet something unfinished still gnawed at him. He turned to Tomas and asked the question that had lived in him since the first night. Where had this paper come from? Who had left words that pierced deeper than any audit? Who had whispered across years with such accuracy? Tomas shifted, his rough hands folded on the table, eyes steady but softer now. He said he had found it weeks ago while cleaning, tucked in a place no one had touched in years, taped under an old locker in the storage wing. The metal rusted, the door stiff. A locker from the early days of the yard, back when Adrian's father ran the company. He had found it by accident, when a mop handle knocked the corner loose. At first, he thought it was nothing, just a scrap left behind. But when he read it, the words caught, sharp and strange. He held it for days in silence, unsure whether to believe it, unsure whether it was even his place to say anything. He admitted that he had almost thrown it away, yet something in him said to keep it. And so he folded it and carried it in his pocket until the night Adrian gave him the jacket. Adrian listened without moving, his heart tightening. He asked if Tomas knew who had written it, and Tomas nodded slowly, his voice lower, saying the handwriting belonged to a driver who had vanished the same year. Adrian's father lost everything. A man named Colton, steady, quiet, loyal, the kind who worked late and asked no questions. One day he was gone, no notice, no call, only a rumor of debts, and a family that left town. People whispered that he had run or been pushed. No one ever knew, but the note proved he had seen something, maybe too much. He had tried to warn someone, tried to stop the theft before it hollowed the company, and when no one listened, when the papers were ignored or never found, he disappeared, leaving behind words no one read in time. Adrian sat back, the weight of it pressing into him, the symbol of the fishhook arrow flashing in his mind, the pages of his father's ledgers, the collapse that had scarred them all. The truth was there all along, hidden in lockers and boxes, waiting for eyes willing to look. The note was not just a warning for him, it was a relic of betrayal carried across years, a thread connecting his father's ruin to his own survival. He whispered that it felt like a message passed from the dead, a reminder that silence destroys and truth saves. Tomas met his gaze with quiet certainty and said sometimes the words that come late still matter. Sometimes they wait for the right hands. And Adrian knew he was right. The note had lived in shadow for decades, but tonight it had spoken, and this time someone listened. The paper lay flat on the table between them, small, fragile, unremarkable to anyone else, but to Adrian it was everything. A bridge between past and present, a warning that had cost one man his life and given another his future. He reached across, tapped it once, and said they would never hide it again. They would frame it, honor it. Let every worker who passed through these halls see the 4 lines that once went unheard. And Tomas nodded, the faintest smile breaking his tired face, the kind of smile that belonged to men who knew they had finally been believed. Morning came soft through the warehouse windows, light spilling over the floor where hours earlier red vans had slipped like thieves. Now the air smelled of coffee instead of fear, machines warming, Voices low but steady. Workers arriving with the calm rhythm of routine. Adrian stood at his desk, with a stack of documents waiting. The kind of papers that usually weighed him down, but today they felt like a release. He signed restitution agreements for clients harmed by the counterfeit shipments. Each signature a small repayment, not just in money, but in trust. The kind of trust that had been nearly shattered. He leaned into each line, rewriting contracts in plain language. No hidden clauses, no polished words that concealed traps. He cut through the legal jargon Brett had used to slip betrayal past his eyes, his pen carving honesty into the very foundation of his business. He told himself this would be the new rule. Clarity first, no fishhooks in margins, no masks in ink. Tomas came in quietly, still in his work clothes, eyes tired but calm. Adrian looked up and motioned him closer. The papers shifting aside, he told Tomas he had something to offer. Not as charity, not as a gift, but as recognition. A role in loss prevention. Real title, real badge, real salary. A position that honored the watchful patience that had saved them all. Tomas blinked, as if unsure he had heard right, his hands tightening against each other, then loosening. When Adrian slid the small envelope across the desk, inside was the formal offer. Embossed letterhead, his name spelled out in clean print. No mop, no cart, no overlooked hours in shadows, but a place beside the very system he had protected without being asked. Tomas's mouth curved slowly into a smile that held more pride than surprise. He said softly that he would take it, that it meant more than money, it meant being seen. Adrian nodded. Because that was the truth of it. The man had been invisible for too long, his eyes sharper than scanners, his silence heavier than alarms. And now the company itself would carry his name in its defense. When the papers were signed, when the coffee was finished, Adrian leaned back in his chair and let the weight of the past weeks settle into place. The note that had begun it all lay framed above his desk. 4 lines preserved under glass, not hidden in a pocket or taped under a locker, but visible, sharp, unmissable. A promise to notice what quiet people see first. Beside it, on the back of his chair, hung the old jacket, worn fabric, faded at the seams. No longer something he needed for warmth, but something he needed for memory. He kept it there, not because of its weight, but because of the story it carried. The story of a janitor who noticed what others ignored, of a driver who left behind a warning no one read in time, of a man who almost lost everything but chose to listen when it mattered. The jacket stayed on, a relic and a reminder, a signal that pride without listening leads to ruin, but humility, paired with attention, saves futures. Adrian touched the sleeve as he rose, whispering to himself that he would never again let silence bury truth, not while he still had eyes to see and ears to hear. And in the clean light of morning, with workers laughing in the hall and Tomas standing taller than before, he knew the promise would hold. If this story moved you like it moved us, don't forget to give it a like. And if you want more stories like this one, hit subscribe. We'd love to have you with us.